Oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, let me start off by saying that you look great up there. Remark that you've achieved in a very short period of time what many speakers dream of, which is a well-behaved chamber. Mr. Speaker, in 2014, I took the ice bucket challenge like many of my colleagues in this House, and I still remember having that big ice bucket dumped on my head when I was health minister, and combined with government funding, that amazing challenge raised $20 million for research funding and $6 million for support programs, but we can do more. So I'm asking the Prime Minister today to join me in asking Canadians from coast to coast to coast to support organizations that are fighting ALS and to find a cure for ALS.
Mr. Speaker, it's a tremendous pleasure to see you there today. I thank my honourable colleague for her question and for her leadership, both as an individual and as a former health minister on this. And I salute you as honourable member for Ottawa Vanier and Speaker for the dignity and grace that you bring to the House every day as you battle this terrible disease. Like many of us in this House, I was pleased to take part in a number of ice bucket challenges, both as dumpee and dumper, and I was pleased to do my part to help raise money and research and awareness for ALS. Canadians pride themselves on looking out for one another, and I join the Leader of the Opposition in urging everyone to give your time and financial support to organizations that are working so hard to find a cure for this terrible disease.
Oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
L'honorable député d'Outremont.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et permettez-moi de vous dire au nom de tous mes collègues à quel point nous sommes tous ravis de vous voir occuper cette fonction aujourd'hui. Monsieur le Président, la semaine dernière, le député d'Ottawa Vanier a été félicité pour son travail en appui aux communautés minoritaires francophones d'Ottawa. Le NPD partage votre conviction qu'il faut protéger et célébrer nos langues officielles à travers le pays. Près d'1 francophone sur 7 habite à l'extérieur du Québec. Nous devons donc en faire plus afin de nous assurer que tout Canadien ait accès à des services dans la langue officielle de son choix, et ce, peu importe où il réside. Que compte faire le Premier ministre afin de poursuivre l'exceptionnelle contribution de l'honorable député d'Ottawa-Vanier afin d'améliorer les services et soutenir les communautés linguistiques minoritaires au Canada?
Bravo!
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais remercier mon collègue pour cette question et souligner que personne dans cette Chambre n'en a fait plus pour soutenir les communautés francophones d'Ottawa et du Canada que vous, en tant qu'honorable député d'Ottawa-Vanier. Depuis votre élection en 1995, vous avez lutté sans relâche pour la dualité linguistique du Canada, l'unité nationale et une société juste et équitable pour tous. Nous allons continuer d'appuyer votre travail incroyable, notamment avec un nouveau plan en matière de langues officielles qui appuiera les minorités linguistiques anglophones et francophones à travers le pays. Cette Chambre, les minorités linguistiques et tout le Canada vous remercie pour votre passion et votre service auprès de nous tous.
J'aimerais maintenant vous remercier tous, chers collègues députés, du grand privilège que vous m'avez accordé de servir en tant que président honoraire de la Chambre des communes aujourd'hui. Merci beaucoup.
I would like to thank you all, dear colleagues of this House, for the great privilege you have bestowed upon me to serve as honorary Speaker of the House of Commons today. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you all, dear colleagues of this House, for the great privilege you have bestowed upon me to serve as honorary Speaker of the House of Commons today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tonight, the Prime Minister is going to be in Washington with his pals at the Centre for American Progress. And while energy workers continue to lose their job across the country, they'll be watching the Prime Minister sip champagne. Now, let's be clear, this is the group that is responsible for the President's rejection of the Keystone XL pipeline. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask the Prime Minister if he'll use his special new relationship and publicly state in Washington that he supports Keystone and ask the President publicly to reverse his decision on Keystone.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, few relationships matter to Canada as much as a good relationship with the United States of America for jobs, for economic growth, for trade purposes, for building the kinds of opportunities for Canadians right across the country that we truly need. For 10 years, those relationships had been strained, and now we're pleased to be able to re-engage on a broad range of important files to be able to build the kinds of opportunities for all Canadians that we know people need. Merci.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, while the Liberals will be celebrating with American organizations that are actually determined to kill Canadian jobs, the Finance Minister back at home keeps racking up the bills. The Prime Minister broke his promise to limit borrowing to a modest $10 billion. But now economists are saying that the Liberals will add $150 billion in debt over the next 4 years, but it'll have virtually no impact on growth. Now, the Prime Minister was left with a surplus. Now that we all know that his borrowing won't create jobs and it won't create growth, why is this government so determined to bury Canadians in debt?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for 10 years, Canada saw lower growth than it needed to because we had a government that was focused on giving tax benefits to the wealthiest and not helping the middle class succeed, not creating the kinds of investments in infrastructure, in our communities, indeed in Canadians who need help that actually was necessary for our economy. That's why we put forward a plan to invest in the future of our country, to help middle-class Canadians, those working hard to join it, and in 2 weeks, all members in this House, and indeed all Canadians, will be able to see the budget that will make that happen.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in fact, our government left the country with the highest growth in the G7 and the lowest taxes in 50 years. But the Prime Minister needs to understand that Canadians actually didn't sign up or vote for this mountain of debt. Not only did the Prime Minister mislead Canadians on these Liberal spending habits, but he has absolutely no plan to pay it back other than raising taxes. Mr. Speaker, when will the Prime Minister realize, like all Canadians, he has to live within his means and he has to pay this money back?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians were faced with a choice in the last election between policies that had failed to create the kinds of growth and opportunities that people need right across the country against a vision that was actually proposing to invest in our future, to put money in the pockets of the middle class and those working hard to join, and investing in the kinds of infrastructure that our communities need to create jobs now and to create growth in the medium and long term. That's the kind of budget we're going to put forward in 2 weeks. That's what Canadians have been waiting 10 years to hear.
L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Jean.
Monsieur le Président, après des années de laxisme de l'ancien gouvernement libéral, en 2006, notre gouvernement conservateur signa une entente sur le bois d'œuvre avec nos partenaires américains. À cette époque, les compagnies payaient jusqu'à 37 % de droits d'exportation et des milliards de dollars dormaient aux États-Unis, des dollars qui appartenaient aux compagnies canadiennes. Monsieur le Président, est-ce que Monsieur le Premier ministre peut s'engager que durant son voyage à Washington, il va demander au président Obama d'avoir une entente rapidement qui permettra à l'industrie forestière de continuer à se développer et d'assurer les emplois dans toutes les régions du Canada?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, les relations entre le Canada et les États-Unis pendant les dernières années étaient rendues tellement mauvaises que cet ancien gouvernement n'a même pas pu soulever à la fin de l'entente de bois d'œuvre une nouvelle entente. C'était à nous de se réengager sur ce dossier et ma première opportunité de m'asseoir avec le président Obama, je lui en ai parlé. On est en train de travailler sur ce dossier-là et nous espérons avoir des bonnes nouvelles pour les Canadiens dans les semaines et les mois à venir.
Député de Lac-Saint-Jean.
Monsieur le Président, je veux rappeler que l'ex-ministre du Commerce international avait déjà pas mal avancé le dossier et j'espère qu'il va se conclure rapidement. Monsieur le Président, en campagne électorale, Monsieur le Premier ministre parlait de petit déficit, de léger déficit. Nous avons laissé un budget équilibré pour l'année en cours, Monsieur le Président. Les chiffres sont là pour l'année en cours. Il y avait un surplus d'opérations. Et là, ils ne sont même plus capables de définir quel sera leur déficit d'opération pour l'année en cours. Et c'est sans parler de la Banque TD qui prédit les 150 milliards de déficits qui seront générés par l'administration du gouvernement libéral. Monsieur le Président, quand le Premier ministre va-t-il ramener notre pays à l'équilibre budgétaire?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, c'est l'ancien gouvernement conservateur qui a hérité d'un surplus de 13 milliards de dollars qu'ils ont dépensé même avant que la récession mondiale frappe en 2008. Nous avons hérité d'un budget en déficit et nous nous sommes engagés envers les Canadiens d'investir dans les communautés, d'investir dans la croissance, d'aider la classe moyenne et tous ceux qui veulent se joindre, travaillent fort pour se joindre à la classe moyenne. Et c'est exactement ce que nous allons faire et nous l'allons présenter dans le budget le 22 mars.
Honorable député d'Outremont.
Yesterday, I asked the Prime Minister about the recent deal that the government made with millionaire tax cheats. He responded that all Canadians should pay their taxes, quote, in the future. Well, to those currently filling out their tax form, it's a bit of a surprise to learn that this wasn't the case before, and that the government lets multimillionaire tax cheats off the hook with no penalty whatsoever. So I'll ask the Prime Minister again, will he conduct an investigation and put a stop to these sweetheart deals for multi-millionaire tax cheats?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this government believes in a level playing field where all Canadians pay their fair share of taxes and are treated equally under the system. Our government came to power with a pledge to strengthen efforts to combat international tax evasion and avoidance. The CRA is pursuing this matter before the courts, and it intends to pursue it to the fullest extent possible, because that's what this government and indeed all Canadians expect.
Honorable député d'Outremont.
They're not pursuing this matter before the courts, and that's the problem. They're letting them off the hook with no fine, no penalty, no interest to pay. Les Canadiens en ont assez de ces fling-flangs qui permettent aux multimillionnaires de ne pas payer leurs impôts et de se faire traiter aux petits oignons par le gouvernement. Hier, le premier ministre ne pouvait même pas nous dire s'il était en désaccord avec cette entente. Alors, question très spécifique pour le premier ministre. Peut-il confirmer que c'est la seule et unique fois que le gouvernement a offert une telle entente bonbon à des millionnaires? C'est oui ou c'est non? Est-ce qu'il y en a d'autres pareils, oui ou non?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, ce gouvernement croit en l'équité fiscale où tous les Canadiens payent leur juste part d'impôts et sont traités équitablement par le système fiscal fédéral. Notre gouvernement est arrivé au pouvoir avec la ferme intention de renforcer nos efforts afin de combattre l'évasion fiscale et l'évitement fiscal international. L'ARC porte cette affaire devant les tribunaux afin d'assurer l'observation de ces lois et elle l'utilisera pour faire tous les recours juridiques qui lui permet la loi. C'est ce que les Canadiens s'attendent de ce gouvernement et de l'ARC.
Il lit tellement bien, le premier ministre, sauf qu'il ne répond pas aux questions. Il lit la même chose deux fois, mais c'est pas ça la question. Est-ce qu'il y en a d'autres, oui ou non? Yesterday, I asked the Prime Minister about the government's promise for, quote, affordable, high-quality, flexible, and fully inclusive child care. It's at page 20 of his platform in case he hasn't been able to find it. Instead of giving us another talking point, can the Prime Minister simply tell us this? What is the government's budget for that specifically defined child care plan they boasted about in their platform?
Hear, hear. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in our platform, we put forward an ambitious plan to invest $20 billion over the next 10 years in social infrastructure. In order to do so, we would work with provinces and municipalities to identify their concrete needs and respond to them. We put that forward in total respect of the province's jurisdiction. The issue that my member opposite faces is that he put forward a plan that actually would be cutting $18 billion from the federal budget right now to reach balance at all costs. That's not how you help families. That's not how you help people with the cost of childcare.
The Prime Minister were really sincere about corporate tax fairness. He'd start by reducing and getting rid of the cuts to corporate taxes that the Conservatives brought in with their complicity because they voted for the Conservative budget. Monsieur le Président, jamais au grand jamais, nos aînés ne devraient être contraints de choisir entre se nourrir, se loger et acheter leurs médicaments. Les libéraux ont promis, et je cite, d'augmenter immédiatement de 10 % le supplément de revenus garanti. 5 mois plus tard, toujours rien, et les aînés continuent de souffrir. C'est combien de mois précisément, immédiatement?
Très honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, nous sommes très préoccupés par le sort de nos aînés et c'est pour ça que nous avons mis dans notre plateforme un engagement d'augmenter de 10 le supplément de revenus garanti pour nos aînés les plus vulnérables. En plus, nous avons fait des engagements pour créer des logements pour nos aînés dans nos investissements en infrastructure. C'est toutes des choses que nous pouvons promettre et que nous pouvons faire parce que nous avons dit aux Canadiens que nous allons investir dans les communautés. Le membre de l'opposition, malheureusement, a promis d'équilibrer le budget et lui, il serait en train de couper 18 milliards de dollars pour nos aînés, pour les Canadiens, au lieu d'investir dans ce qu'ils ont besoin.
The honourable member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are borrowing money that they don't have to spend on pet projects that we don't need. Right. They're throwing fiscal responsibility under their spending bonfire. And with $150 billion expected in borrowing, a balanced budget under the Liberals is nothing but a pipe dream. Mr. Speaker, when will the Liberals realize that we have to pay this money back and that borrowed money isn't free?
Here, right out. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Honourable for her question. Mr. Speaker, we have a fundamentally different approach. We have an approach about growing our economy, Mr. Speaker, and that's what Canadians voted for on the 19th of October, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what we're going to be delivering. We're going to invest in innovation, we're going to invest in productivity, we're going to invest in infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, we're going to invest in the middle class for this country.
The honourable member for Haldeman Norfolk.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the previous government went into deficit to fight the biggest financial crisis since the 1930s. And then we balanced the budget without raising taxes. The Liberals are spending money that they don't have to fight a recession that we're not in. They've already slashed tax-free savings accounts, and now they're jacking up payroll taxes. Mr. Speaker, how high will taxes go to pay for risky Liberal deficits?
Right on. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, as the OECD said in the IMF, there's never been a better time to invest in the economy. Canadians know, Mr. Speaker, that when interests are low, that's the time to invest. As we went from coast to coast to coast in this country, the Minister in Finance and I, we listened to Canadians. And what Canadians have been telling us is invest in the economy, invest in the middle class, invest in infrastructure. And you know, Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we're going to be doing.
The honourable member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, another week, another broken promise. In Paris, the Prime Minister promised he would give Canadians a climate change plan within 90 days. Well, last week in Vancouver, the 90 days were up. And what happened? No plan. Just a plan to have a plan. And surprise, surprise, he also threatened to hammer the provinces with a carbon tax grab. As the Prime Minister wines and dines in Washington, and as investors flee Canada, and as Canadians lose thousands of jobs, will he now admit that he's in way over his head?
The Honourable Secretary for Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I think Canadians are incredibly proud of the work that this government has done on climate change. If we look at the progress that has been accomplished in the last 5 months, we have a historic international deal in which Canada played a critical role. We have an arrangement that has been agreed upon by all provinces and territories to develop a pan-Canadian framework. That is real progress. We are going to Washington this week to actually make further progress on a continental basis. My goodness, relative to the last 10 years of inaction under the Conservatives, this is real change.
Honourable member for Abbotsford.
Well, Mr. Speaker, broken promises are not in Canada's best interest. Canadians are losing jobs, Liberal deficits are skyrocketing, balanced budgets are out the window, and now the Prime Minister has picked a fight with the provinces by threatening a harmful carbon tax. And contrary to what the Prime Minister and his Parliamentary Secretary just said, there is no deal, there is no climate change plan. So what happened to the new relationship with the provinces that was promised? And why has the Prime Minister's sunny ways turned into gloomy days for Canada?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that we need to reduce greenhouse gases and to grow our economy in a sustainable way. They also know that reducing emissions will make our economy more competitive, not less competitive. Carbon pricing policies that the honourable member talked about will minimize the cost of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, provide a continuous incentive for technological innovation, and allow us to achieve significant emissions reductions. And I would say the honourable member should listen to some of the folks who used to sit on that side of the House. The current Ontario Conservative leader and former MP on that side of the House stated this week, climate change is a fact, it is a threat, it is man-made, we have to do something about it. And
the honourable member for Barrie, Springwater, Oro-Medonte.
Mr. Speaker, Liberal policies make doing business in Canada more expensive. Auto manufacturers are hurting in Ontario because our electricity rates are 30% higher than other jurisdictions. And that is before the new Liberal carbon tax. When will this Liberal government give manufacturers a break rather than break manufacturers?
The Honourable Minister for Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to say today is a very special day. It's an honor and privilege to serve with the member from Ottawa Vanier. For me, he's a role model. I'm just delighted to be here today with him. With respect to the question asked, we have a plan when it comes to manufacturing. We have a plan that's going to help companies adopt in the 21st digital economy by making sure we have ICT adoption. We're also going to put forward industrial and technological benefits that will assist companies, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan for manufacturing because we know manufacturing is very important to our future progress, growth, and creating jobs.
Bravo. Honourable member for Barrie, Springwater, Oro-Medonte.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are missing in action. The Canadian manufacturing jobs are at risk. The low dollar has put Canadian goods on sale, but the Liberals refuse to explain how they'll encourage private sector investment. Yesterday, they even blocked the Industry Committee from asking Bombardier about a $1 billion bailout. What are the Liberals hiding? Is the reason the Liberals won't share their plan with Canadians because they don't have a plan to share?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, we're a very open and transparent government. We've been very clear with Canadians. When it comes to committees, they have their own unique dynamic and they set their own agenda. But with respect to Bombardier, Mr. Speaker, we're engaged with them. They came forward with a proposal on December the 11th of up to $1 billion. They asked for an investment. We're looking at the business case. We're doing our due diligence. We're going to make sure we do our homework. We're going to make sure that we provide a thoughtful response in the public interest, Mr. Speaker.
Madame la députée de Laurier-Sainte-Marie.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais ça comprendre. Il paraît que la mission en Irak, c'est pas une mission de combat. Mais nos soldats vont se retrouver au front, puis ils vont avoir le droit de tirer en premier. C'est pas une mission de combat, ça? Alors, est-ce que le ministre de la Défense peut nous expliquer pourquoi le gouvernement s'entête à nier l'évidence et pourquoi il refuse de dire aux Canadiens et à nos soldats que c'est bel et bien une mission de combat?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence.
Speaker, it is true that our soldiers will be at greater risk, as has said by the Chief of the Defence Staff. But I can't do better than quote him at the committee yesterday, where he said, in an engagement like this, specifically allow Canadian forces to defend themselves, anticipate their defence so that they can engage a hostile act or a hostile act intent before it materializes. So our soldiers are not engaged in combat. They are allowed to defend themselves, and the rules of engagement are clear for all concerned. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Esquimalt, Saanich-Sooke.
The National Defence Military Foreign Service instructions define a combat mission as one, quote, where the use or threatened use of force, including lethal force, is used to accomplish the mission. Yesterday, Canada's Chief of Defence Staff admitted that in the Liberals' new expanded mission in Iraq, Canadian troops will not only be authorized to use lethal force, but also to shoot first. Mr. Speaker, to everyone except this government, that sounds exactly like the definition of combat. Why is the Liberal government continuing to try to disguise the nature of this mission and its risks?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
There's no disguise, Mr. Speaker. This is, in fact, a non-combat mission, as I just outlined with what the Chief of Defence Staff just said. So the honourable member can argue with the Chief of Defence Staff, but he has in fact outlined this as a non-combat mission. We are there to train, to assist, to advise, and to produce intelligence. So the honourable member may wish to argue with the CDS, and I welcome his opportunity to do that. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a non-combat mission as defined by the Chief of Defence Staff.
The honourable member for Parry Sound, Muskoka.
Mr. Speaker, Nadia Savchenko, a Ukrainian Air Force pilot and member of the Ukrainian Parliament, has been held illegally in a Russian prison for 21 long months. Many thousands of people in Ukraine and around the world are demanding her release as she continues her hunger strike. Yet all the efforts by the international community to advocate for her release have been brushed aside by Moscow. Mr. Speaker, time is running out. How can Canada's call for the release of Ms. Savchenko be taken seriously when all the Liberals want to do is have happy talk with Putin?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. That could not be more misconstrued. As the Minister explicitly said in his declaration yesterday, the Government of Canada is gravely concerned about the health of Nadia Savchenko, who has been unlawfully detained by Russia. We have repeatedly underlined that her transfer to Russia was illegal. The charges brought against her are politically motivated, and her treatment during her detention is a matter of grave concern. The Government of Canada calls on Russia to immediately release her and return her to her friends, colleagues, and family in Ukraine.
The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, Nadia Savchenko has restarted her hunger strike. Her health is deteriorating, and the Liberals have done next to nothing. The charges against Nadia are clearly trumped up. This illegal show trial demonstrates the Russian regime's utter contempt for international law, due process, and human rights. Rallies are scheduled across Canada this evening, demanding her release. The Liberals are saying that they want to talk to Russia. So, will the Prime Minister pick up the phone, call the Kremlin, and demand that they free Nadia Savchenko immediately?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I say that Canada stands steadfast with Ukraine. We always have, and we always will. And as I stated, and I'm happy to state it again, we have repeatedly underlined that Ms. Savchenko's transfer to Russia was illegal. We know it was politically motivated. Her treatment during her detention is a matter of grave concern, and we call on Russia to immediately release her. Thank you.
Honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, the U.S.-led Air Combat Coalition successfully took out the ISIS's war minister. The Pentagon said that this is a victory on the battlefield and will hurt ISIS's ability to recruit foreign fighters. Clearly, these airstrikes are working, but the Liberals have taken us out of the fight. Just once, can the Defence Minister coherently explain why the Canadian Armed Forces cannot do both airstrikes and training? Just once.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I would like the honourable member to explain what he doesn't get about democracy. We have had an election for a year, the longest election in Canadian history. The decision of the Canadian people was definitive on October the 19th. We then had a debate here for 4 or 5 days, 98 speakers. The vote this week was definitive. So what part of democracy does not the honourable member get? We have debated this and debated this. The people have spoken, and it's unfortunate for the honourable member.
Député de Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, je vais le reprendre en français, donner une chance à mon collègue de l'autre côté. Le réseau CNN révèle que des attaques aériennes américaines en Syrie auraient tué celui qui était considéré comme le ministre de la guerre de l'État islamique. Ce militaire tchétchène s'est joint à des groupes rebelles en Syrie, puis a prêté allégeance à l'État islamique en 2012. Il avait participé à des vidéos de propagande et de recrutement pour l'État islamique, et le département d'État américain a offert une récompense de 5 millions de dollars pour se débarrasser de cet individu. En voyant ce résultat, obtenu par des pilotes américains, merci à eux, est-ce que ce gouvernement doute encore de l'efficacité des frappes aériennes contre l'État islamique?
Madame Secrétaire parlementaire pour la Défense nationale.
Mr. Speaker, we are engaged in a coalition. The coalition has quite a number of partners. We do some things very well. Advise, assist, and train, we do very well. Intelligence missions, we do very well. We are engaged, as I say, in a coalition, and we are working together to delete this scourge from that particular part of the world. Mr. Speaker, the idea of this coalition is to end this combat, and we are contributing in a significant and major way. Thank you.
Monsieur le Président, la tragédie des pensionnats indiens continue d'être un fardeau pour de nombreux individus. Au pensionnat de Sainte-Anne, dans le nord de l'Ontario, par exemple, un survivant tente d'obtenir justice, mais il se bute à des avocats du ministère de la Justice qui ont sciemment, oui, Monsieur le Président, sciemment retenu des documents qui auraient appuyé sa cause. C'est complètement, non seulement inadmissible, c'est révoltant, Monsieur le Président. Est-ce que la ministre de la Justice va ordonner à son personnel d'arrêter de nier les demandes légitimes de ce survivant et de cesser cette obstruction?
Mr. Speaker, the Government of Canada is committed to the successful implementation of the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement and to fulfilling all its obligations under the agreement. The abuse of children is tragic and unacceptable. While I cannot comment about the specific cases under the Independent Assessment Protocol, I can tell you that Canada has complied with Justice Perrell's June 2015 order and provided all the documents as soon as they were complete. In addition, Canada has revised and made available an updated school narrative of person of interest reports for St. Anne's in compliance with the court direction. The update.
Honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, the independent assessment process was supposed to bring justice to survivors. Instead, government lawyers in the Justice Department had over 1,000 cases thrown out under the administrative split. We now find that Justice Department lawyers suppressed evidence about a serial pedophile at St. Anne's Residential School and then told the hearings that the victims were simply lacking credibility. This is really Canada's spotlight. If the Justice Minister cannot explain why this is happening, I'm asking her, will she do the right thing? Will she stand up in this House and say she will meet the survivors and fix...
The Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
I thank the member for the question, and I too feel that this is a terrible tragedy. I thank the member for the clarification. Pedophilia is a terrible crime, and we need to deal with the ongoing effects of those abuses. It is. I want to tell the honourable member that I am the client. The Justice Minister is my advisor, and we will get to the bottom of this and seek justice.
I encourage the members in the front row at the far end to try to calm down and listen to the question. We all want to hear each side, even if we disagree. The honourable member for Oakville North, Burlington.
Mr. Speaker, when I was a municipal councillor, I was approached by Myrna Forster and was pleased to lead Oakville Council calling on the Bank of Canada to include a prominent Canadian woman on one of our banknotes, which is something we haven't seen in almost 150 years. Thousands of people from across the country signed a petition calling on the government to highlight Canadian women on our money, recognizing the significant role that women have played in shaping our nation. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance outline the government's plan for action on this important issue?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for a question. Yesterday on International Women's Day, events across the country celebrated the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of Canadian women. I am proud to tell this House that the Minister of Finance, in collaboration with the Bank of Canada Governor Stephen Pawlas, has launched consultations on the Bank of Canada website, inviting Canadians to nominate iconic women who they want to see on the new banknote that will be issued in 2018. Don't forget to use the hashtag #BanknoteNotable to share your IDs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, we recognize that much work needs to be done to resolve long-standing Indigenous land claims. However, every government in the past has been unequivocal that private property is not on the table. The recent lawsuit by SSN is looking to declare Aboriginal title over private property. As the Premier of BC said, this has huge implications across Canada. Will the Justice Minister step up to protect Canadian private property rights?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again for the question. As the member across knows, this is a matter that is before the court, so I won't speak to particular circumstances with respect to that. But what I will say, in working with the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, ensure that we work collaboratively in terms of mandates and approaches that are being put forward in negotiating and settling the land question in British Columbia, and rest assured that this settlement will be based on a nation-to-nation relationship that is based on recognition. Thank you.
Honourable member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
You know what, Mr. Speaker, the courts are waiting. They have been waiting after this minister has asked for extension after extension in terms of what the position of the government of Canada is going to be. The people of Kamloops are worried, and she's been delaying the response. So please, will she stand up and tell Canadians that she will defend private property rights in Canada?
Honourable Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to say that the way that we are going forward is not to discuss the cases before the courts at this time, but I do want the member to understand, and we need all members of this House to understand, what it means to move forward in a nation-to-nation approach based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation and partnership is something that every single member of this House needs to understand, and to understand sticking up for the rights of the First Peoples of this country is all of our job.
The honourable member for Niagara Falls.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The BC government has stated that it will vigorously oppose any declaration that creates any uncertainty for private property owners. Now, on January 15th, the Minister of Justice asked for an extension before making a decision. Well, Mr. Speaker, it's been close to 8 weeks and still no response. Now, while the Premier of BC has boldly reassured Canadians, the Justice Minister has left landowners in the dark. Now, will she stand with the Premier of BC to defend property rights, yes or no?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the member for the question, and as I stated, this matter is before the courts. What I instructed my officials to do was seek an adjournment, and at the request or in my mandate letter from the Prime Minister, we are looking at our litigation strategy, doing a comprehensive review, and in terms of specific cases, that will potentially change our approach. But with respect to particular mandates, I will be working and supporting my colleague, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, in this regard.
The member for Niagara Falls.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For years, judges were routinely granting 2-for-1 and even 3-for-1 credits for time served before trial. Now, this is why we brought in the Truth in Sentencing Act, to ensure that convicted offenders served the sentences they were given. Now it appears there are judges in Ontario who are disregarding that law. Now, the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Justice says a law is a law is a law. Well, are they going to do what it takes to enforce the present law, or will criminals continue to get a break?
Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, again, I'd like to thank the member for the question. In terms of our approach, we are undertaking a comprehensive review of the criminal justice system. That includes sentencing reform to determine efficiencies and effectiveness in the process, and will ensure that I work with my colleagues, including the Minister of Public Safety, to look at bail reform and other matters with respect to how we can proceed and ensure fairness, equality, compliance with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and ensuring that the accused rights are respected.
The member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
The Prime Minister promised that no relationship was more important to him than that with Indigenous peoples. That relationship has not been respected in the case of BC's Site C Dam, where there are 3 ongoing court cases with First Nations. This is a litmus test of the Prime Minister's solemn commitment.
Sure is.
And repeated letters from First Nations have been ignored by the Liberals. Will the government please cease and desist on approval for Site C until proper consultation can occur?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Prime Secretary for Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the fall of 2014, as members know, the former government approved the project and set out a series of legally binding conditions with which the proponent must comply. BC Hydro must meet the requirements set out in these conditions, and we are verifying that that is in fact the case. The minister has been involved and engaged in discussions with First Nations people and other Indigenous organizations to try to ensure that we are clearly understanding those concerns, and we will continue to engage in that basis going forward.
The Honourable Member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.
You have to wonder which First Nations they're engaging with, because the First Nations actually impacted by this megadam can't even get their letters returned from this government. And it seems to me that there are two Liberal parties, one that's in campaign, makes sacred promises to First Nations people, and one that governs to break them. Now the question comes for this Liberal government here and now. They are right now in the position of authorizing this megadam in northeastern British Columbia. First Nations have pleaded with this government not to do so, to pause the process and allow that consultation they promised to actually take place. So which Liberal Party are we actually going to see?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As I said in my previous response, this government continues to engage with First Nations and other Indigenous organizations and peoples to ensure that we are developing a nation-to-nation approach. With respect to the specific matter of Site C, that is before the court. I can't comment on the specifics of that, but there certainly are ongoing discussions that are relevant to the broader First Nations and nation-to-nation relationship.
Monsieur le Président, hier, le ministre des Anciens combattants a laissé entendre qu'il travaillait en coordination avec le ministère du Patrimoine afin d'identifier les possibilités d'aller de l'avant avec la construction de monuments commémoratifs. Toutefois, on ne sait pas encore si oui ou non il y aura un monument national commémoratif spécifiquement pour la mission en Afghanistan. Monsieur le Président, je demande au ministre, le budget va-t-il inclure une enveloppe pour ce monument national que notre gouvernement conservateur avait annoncé, oui ou non?
It is very important for us to honor the men and women who have served this country valiantly in Afghanistan. This government is aware of the motion put forward in 2014, supported by all members of this House, and we are working very hard with the Minister of Heritage to see that put through. But I think it's also important for us to show care, compassion, respect to those members through veteran services that we're doing right now. And he'll also see that by us reopening the 9 offices that his party closed, as well as rehiring staff that they also let go.
Monsieur le Président, contrairement à ce que le ministre a insinué plusieurs fois depuis 4 mois, le gouvernement conservateur précédent a fait plus pour les vétérans que n'importe quel gouvernement canadien depuis la loi des pensions de 1919. Monsieur le Président, le gouvernement libéral a annulé le programme d'aide à l'édification des monuments commémoratifs dans les collectivités. Cela illustre clairement que ce présent gouvernement n'est pas dévoué à honorer nos vétérans. Honorer convenablement nos femmes et nos hommes des Forces armées canadiennes n'est pas du militarisme, Monsieur le Président, c'est tout simplement un impératif moral. Maintenant que les libéraux annulent le programme, comment comptent-ils honorer les exploits de nos membres de l'aviation royale, ceux qui ont combattu contre l'État islamique?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a saying in my neighborhood, you lie to your friends, I'll lie to my friends, let's not lie to each other. Here's the true record of what the Conservative government has done over the last 10 years. Closed veteran affairs offices. They have cut staff by 800 people. Tell you what, for the last 10 years, it's been really a shame. We are working hard to ensure that we treat our men and women with care, compassion, and respect. I have an aggressive mandate letter from the Prime Minister that's going to see more employment opportunities and support their families, and we plan on following through exactly with that.
Well, I know that the Honourable Minister did not accuse another member of lying. He came a little too close for my liking. I'd encourage members not to use that kind of language. The Honourable Member from Yorkton Melville.
Mr. Speaker, we learned this week that the Liberals are cancelling the Community War Memorial Program. This program, implemented by the Conservatives in 2010, has enabled communities and organizations across Canada to build new or upgrade old cenotaphs and war memorials, honouring the achievements and sacrifices of those who served Canada in times of war and peace and military conflict. The Department of Veterans Affairs acknowledges that there's a continued need for this essential program. So since you're listening, why do the Liberals think cutting this project is a good idea?
Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for her question. In the Veterans Affairs, we understand it's very important for us to commemorate those men and women who have served in our armed forces. We have done that as a country through Vimy Ridge, through World War II, through our Korean peacekeepers, through our role in Bosnia, and we will do so in Afghanistan. That is an important part of what we do in this department. It's important what we do on this side of the House, and we'll continue to show in a meaningful way the respect that our men and women who have served this great country deserve.
The member for Fredericton.
Monsieur le Président, afin que le Canada demeure compétitif au sein de l'économie globale, il est important que nous recrutions et retenons des étudiants internationaux de haut calibre. À Fredericton, UNB et St. Thomas University travaillent fort afin d'accomplir cet objectif. Le ministre de l'Immigration, de la Citoyenneté et des Réfugiés peut-il informer cette Chambre des initiatives entreprises par ce gouvernement afin d'encourager ces étudiants à haut potentiel à demeurer au pays?
Bravo. Ministre de l'Immigration.
Je remercie mon collègue de Fredericton pour sa bonne question. Et les étudiants internationaux sont parmi les meilleurs candidats de devenir canadiens. Ils parlent anglais ou français, ils ont une bonne éducation canadienne, ils connaissent le pays. Et donc, il n'était pas du tout intelligent pour l'ancien gouvernement quand ils ont enlevé le crédit de 50% qu'avaient reçu ces étudiants pour devenir canadiens. Et je suis très content de dire que nous allons restaurer ce crédit.
Honourable member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, Iran today test-fired 2 ballistic missiles that the regime says proves its ability to strike Israel. The missiles carried the words, "Israel must be wiped out." Now, former Liberal MP Irwin Cotler is on record saying, "I don't know if the Prime Minister has an appreciation of evil." The Prime Minister said this week he thinks Canada is sending exactly the right signals on Iran. Mr. Speaker, isn't this just another example of the Prime Minister's inability to appreciate evil?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Our engagement with Iran does not mean we agree with their government. And also, to boycott Iran will not help Israel. While we reduce some sanctions on Iran, together with our allies, related to progress in shutting down their nuclear program, we also added sanctions that targeted their ballistic missile program. Again, we did this in complete coordination with our allies. We will continue to apply pressure on Iran to end its unacceptable missile development program, and we will continue to be strong friends with Israel.
Honorable député de Rosemont, la petite patrie.
Monsieur le Président, l'aérospatial est un secteur économique vital pour le Québec. Juste dans la région de Montréal, 1 emploi sur 100 est relié à cette industrie. Mais on dirait que les libéraux ne comprennent pas ça. Pendant la campagne électorale, ils n'ont présenté aucun plan, aucune stratégie pour ce secteur-là. Rien, zéro. Puis on attend encore des nouvelles dans le dossier de Bombardier. En ce moment, ce secteur-là est fragile et les pertes d'emplois se multiplient. Quand est-ce que le gouvernement libéral va se réveiller, appuyer l'économie québécoise et ses travailleurs et présenter un vrai plan d'action pour le secteur aérospatial?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, our government understands and supports the aerospace sector. It's a sector that employs 180,000 people, not only in Montreal or Quebec, but across Canada, Mr. Speaker. It's a sector that contributes $29 billion to our GDP, and that is why we take very seriously the engagement with Bombardier. On December the 11th, they approached the federal government officially in writing to ask for up to $1 billion. We are doing our due diligence. We're looking at the business case. We understand the importance of not only Bombardier, but this sector, and we'll make sure any decision that we make will be in the best interest of Canadians and Quebecers.
The honourable member for Sydney, Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, the Port of Sydney has long been an essential asset to the economy of Cape Breton. Studies have shown that the construction of a second marine berth in the harbour will greatly enhance port traffic, especially in the cruise ship sector. So my question is to the Minister of Infrastructure. Does the Minister see this project of a second berth for the Port of Sydney as a type of project worthy of consideration for infrastructure?
Minister of Infrastructure.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for Sydney, Victoria, for his continued hard work regarding this project. We know there are significant benefits to infrastructure investment. That is why, Mr. Speaker, our government has committed to add $60 billion of new money into infrastructure over the next 10 years. We understand that well-planned infrastructure investments in the regions like Cape Breton generate economic growth, create jobs, and leave a lasting legacy for Canadians. I have met with my counterparts in Nova Scotia, and we will continue to work together on our shared infrastructure priorities.
Yes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Les libéraux s'étaient engagés à lever la barre en matière de transparence lors de la dernière campagne électorale. Mais hier, coup de théâtre. Coup de théâtre, Monsieur le Président, les députés libéraux du Comité de l'industrie ont voté unanimement contre une motion que nous avons déposée pour inviter Bombardier à venir témoigner devant le Comité de l'industrie. Les membres du comité voulaient savoir pourquoi Bombardier a besoin d'une aide de 1,2 milliard de dollars. Et aujourd'hui, je pose ma question au président du Comité de l'industrie. Pourquoi s'entête-t-il à empêcher Bombardier à venir témoigner devant les parlementaires?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for the question. As the member knows, that committees are independent. But the point that he raised is a very important one.
Order, we've been doing so well. It's been a very good day. I can't hear the answer. Let's settle down and listen to the answer from our Minister of Economic Development.
So the point that the member raises is a very important one. He understands and appreciates that our government is open and transparent. So I'm glad to hear that the member understands that. The member also understands that he has an opportunity in committee to talk about these issues. One thing I can assure the member, that we will continue to engage with the company because we understand the importance of the sector, we understand the importance of creating jobs. We have a plan not only for the company, we have a plan not only for the sector, we have a plan for all Canadians when it comes to growing the economy, and that will be demonstrated on a budget on March 22nd.
The honourable member for Sandwich, Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Transportation, and it pertains to a critical threat to the survival of Via Rail and our coast-to-coast service. The previous Minister of Transportation convened a panel chaired by former Cabinet Minister David Emerson. It's now reported and shockingly recommends that this government kill passenger rail between Toronto and Vancouver. This transcontinental train, the Canadian, is an essential part of Sir John A. Macdonald's national dream. Can the minister confirm that they will protect Via Rail, restore and invest in our Trans-Canada Rail service?
You have a recognition first. Minister of Transport.
I thank the member for her question, Mr. Speaker. It is important that other levels of government and stakeholders have an opportunity to read the CTA review report and share their perspectives on its findings before we address specific recommendations. I have been mandated by the Prime Minister to respond to the review, and I can assure Canadians that this government is committed to developing the best approach to delivering a safe, efficient and reliable passenger rail service in Canada from coast to coast.